Hey YouTube, I'm Ross Magas. This is not real life. And today I ask you, what is a metaphor? To help us here, I actually have the definition of what a metaphor is from Google and from Merriam-Webster. So on Google, if you just search the word metaphor, a metaphor is a figure of speech in which a word or phrase is applied to an object or action to which it is not literally applicable. Example: her poetry depends on the suggestion and metaphor. I don't think this is actually a really good example sentence, but we'll get to that later. Merriam-Webster, the dictionary people, define a metaphor as a figure of speech in which a word or phrase literally denoting one kind of object or idea is used in place as another to suggest a likeness or analogy between them. AKA, drowning in money. For lack of a better term, I think this is a better definition. Not to shit on Google or anything like that, but why am I talking to you about the definition of metaphor? Well, since you clicked on this video, thank you for joining me here today. And today I'd like to talk to you guys about the game Metaphor ReFantazio. And, you know, just in the title, you might ask yourself, what's the metaphor? And while eventually I'll get into why I don't know if this is necessarily the correct word, it probably is, but it honestly just feels like it's probably the best sounding word to describe what is happening. Let's not worry about that for now, but let's actually start talking about the game. Oh, and for those of you who are concerned, this video is my B-roll here. I've already beaten the game, and minor spoilers for some story elements or character things, and spoilers for some weapons that you won't have access to till way later. But Metaphor ReFantazio is a game by Atlus. It follows the Persona and I assume Shin Megami Tensei archetypes. I've actually not played the Shin Megami Tensei games, and I'm only familiar with Persona as of yet. And it's a nice evolution of how they make their RPGs, and I think it's a really interesting game, to say the least. So let's start first with the actual game. It is an RPG, you know, JRPG. You grind out levels, you have different character classes. In this game, instead of having personas, they call them archetypes. But for those of you who've already played Persona, this is going to be relatively familiar, but with some tweaks here and there. Some systems have been renamed, some systems are a little bit different, and some things have just been tweaked. And some of the biggest changes you'll see in combat are like, if you get a successful like exploitation of an enemy's weakness, you can get actually extra turns out of it. And it's similar to how when you got the critical and then you can do an all-out attack and they fall over and you can just kind of exploit them. But what is the story of Metaphor? So, unlike Persona, and I guess much closer to Shin Megami Tensei, Persona follows your protagonist, who apparently is canonically named Will. In my first playthrough, I named him Yusha, because, you know, he's the hero. But your character is the friend of the rightful heir prince of the land, and the game introduces you with a cutscene to get you a lay of the land and see what's going on politically speaking. This game is very heavy into the regional politics of this country and the machinations of trying to seize power and who's doing what, who's conspiring against who's it's actually, that part's really fun. And they show you straight away who the villain is in the story. So well, I'm not going to go directly into story spoilers, but just to give you the idea of how things are set up. Your character is, again, friends with the rightful heir and prince of the kingdom, who has been stricken by a curse. And it turns out this same villain is the one who they show has assassinated the king in the first video you'll see in the story. And essentially you're out on a revenge quest to try to save the prince, because the only way to undo the curse is to either learn how to do it or to get rid of the guy who made it. Along the way, you'll meet colorful cast of characters, and you'll know the characters are important because all the characters look like the fashion designer's version of whatever that character should be. The character designs actually really do stand out a lot compared to some of the normal characters who fit better into what the general feel of the world is. But you'll collect a colorful cast of characters as you go along and unveil that things are not as they seem, and things can actually tend to put more at stake until you have to, you guessed it, save the world. Now, the Atlus company, I guess, they are quite known for this, and you can see this in the Persona games too. They're very known for having really flashy graphic design and really flashy characters. While graphically this is not the greatest of all games, you know, it's not going to win any awards for the number of triangles and pixels, like, you know, to create each model, but cohesively looking, it's actually really cool. The UI looks amazing. You can see it, and it is kind of noisy if you don't like that kind of thing, but they know how to walk the line between having so many disparate elements and so many flashy things, and things are going kind of constantly doing things even in the menu. So you may not like that, but I thought it was really cool. And to bring it back earlier, this is the first of these games. I'm not super familiar with their catalog, but with Persona, a lot of the characters have like a really instant appeal in how they're designed to me. And in Metaphor, that was actually not the case for quite a few characters, and actually kind of the whole overall aesthetic to begin with. This is especially true in this game, they call them archetypes, but you know, your power that you summon that you can enable you to do your special abilities. A lot of them just didn't gel for me at first when I was just looking at them and how they're designed, but after a while you kind of get used to it and you see like, yes, this kind of does fit here with the whole world, and everything kind of meshes together really well, because, you know, it does. But there's something about it that I found off-putting at first, and I remember in the trailers when the game first came out, I was like, oh, Atlus, cool, I'll probably play it. Not really feeling this art style. But now that I've actually played it, I like it a lot more than initially, but there's still stuff about it that I personally wouldn't have chosen, or I wouldn't have made that choice if I was in charge. But they're not bad designs, I just don't like some of them. Another great aspect of these games, which I think this is just I want to say trademark, because all of these things together must be the Atlus trademark, but the music in this game is really good. But again, like the art design, there's something about it that initially didn't... that's not true. I like the music a lot in this game, but there's some things about it that threw me off at first. And I think this is most easily observable with the battle theme. And I'll play a bit of it for you right here, so you know what I'm talking about. So this song, the battle theme, I forget what it's called, but I'll put it here as text on the screen for you guys. Has this weird like rapping monk feel, and it's so outside the realm of things I'm aware of, but it's also really cool. But at the same time, it makes me kind of laugh every time I hear it. So, and you'll hear it a lot because you go through battles, and if you play anything like the way I do, sometimes you'll actually end battles before he starts. So right when he starts getting into his like, you know, and like the battle's already over and we're getting back to the world screen. There are a couple minor performance issues in this game. I know some people really care about that kind of stuff. I notice a couple frame dropping things here, especially in loading screens between zones. Sometimes you see it, especially if you're getting to a big zone. that can happen. But in general, the game runs well enough that it's not going to affect you. Or for me, I didn't have any issues. It didn't really bother me, but you will notice it once in a while here or there. The voiceovers in the game too are excellent. I listened to it in English, so that way I could actually hear them without always reading and maybe miss something. Because a lot of times like when you're in battle and you just defeat an enemy, the characters will say something real quick and they use a voice line that basically represents how they feel, even though the voice line doesn't always match the little blurb that pops up on the screen. But if you've played any of the previous Persona games, like, you know, you'll recognize that kind of thing, especially if you played probably the remake recently. But the story itself, I found, was the strongest portion of this for me. I played through most of the game on normal, like 80% of it, but at some point I felt like, you know what, I really just want to know what's gonna happen. I gotta know, I want to know. And I would bump it down to easy because I just wanted to get through it faster, and by then I'd experienced most of the combat. And I don't feel like that's a big deal, but like if you want, you can actually play on the super uber difficulties where you can't change it, or the super easy difficulty where you can't change it, and you'll have a good time either way. It really depends on how much you like grinding and playing RPG type of game. But for me, the story is the most compelling part of this, and the difficulty itself of getting through that I found not as big a deal if you move it up and down, because I would change it constantly. Sometimes there were actually a couple times where I had gotten ahead of myself and ended up needing to do that just to complete the thing without like quitting, or because you can't grind in the traditional sense, I found. But that itself, it's not super difficult, but I was just being careless. I've mentioned the story a few times here. I'm not going to give any details aside from the brief synopsis of what sets the story in motion that I gave earlier. But I did find it really interesting, and there's a lot of things that once they present to you the reasoning for this thing, it's really cool to think about, oh, how did this come to be? I really appreciated the little tidbits, like, so when you go to different places, there's like a map system, and when you're traveling, as soon as you get to their location, the narrator comes on, and this is the same narrator you're going to hear a whole bunch because it's the calendar system. Every day you're going to hear him say, oh, another day has passed. And whoever they picked, he had an excellent, like, really velvety smooth voice. It was very nice and like inviting. And when you go to a new area, he would always tell you like little tidbits about that and just give you a lot of color and the way they describe what's happening, you know? And I really appreciate that. That's a nice detail. So a lot of times I didn't want to skip any of these things, and I just wanted to hear everything that people said. There are a couple of points in the story where I was genuinely surprised with a twist, and while some events were being set up in such a way where I knew this couldn't possibly be the outcome, but I was so captivated that I want to be like, okay, so you're telling me A is going to happen, but I know C is what we need to do. How are you going to get through this and make it believable and keep me hooked? And they did not disappoint. There are a couple things that you can probably guess if you're paying attention to the story, and you just put two together. They do a good job of kind of laying down foundation here and there, crumbs of things as you go through the story. So I wouldn't expect to be super surprised by anything, like twist wise or, you know, turn wise, but the story is very expertly told in a pretty straightforward manner. But again, there were a couple of twists here and there that surprised me, and I was really happy with how they were resolved. However, that being said, with the story is actually, I really appreciated the story and how things are presented. This is hard to say because in this game, I feel the themes of the game are actually kind of spoilery. So if you don't want to listen to the rest of this, I I'll put a timestamp or like something so we know where I'm not talking about it anymore. But the themes of this game are quite honestly probably one of the things I really loved, but I also felt they could have pushed harder for. This is probably the place where the game falls short the most, but a lot of the themes they visit in this game are pretty cool, especially because they've separated themselves from the real world by having, you know, the fake races that they have, the Parapus, the Rogue, the what do you call the elves? They're elves. They have long ears. Rondine, I think is what it was called. You know, the Clamar. They're all cool little races, and they don't fit neatly into the traditional fantasy tropes. You know, except for like, you know, that the people have long ears and look like elves. Aside from that, how they're described in world and what they can do does not match up with the general association that most people have with elves, a la Tolkien, right? So, but there are themes of racism, classism, what is the duty of a leader, you know, all of these things, and they're handled in a pretty earnest way. They're not like the deepest, darkest dives into some of these stories, but they do give a fair shake at things, and they present a lot of these themes to help you reflect on these things that we see in our everyday lives. You know, we may not experience them directly, but we know they're out there. We can hear about them, that kind of thing. Another theme that they tackle is anxiety, and this one is a big one. Okay, so this one is probably the most spoilery of all of them, and one of the things I think is really cool is that in the game they tackle what anxiety means and what it can be, because you can be crippled by it, right? Or you can harness it into something greater, and that is pretty explicitly stated. So as you get through the story, and this is where like the whole issue I was having earlier was like, why is this game called Metaphor? What is a metaphor? So if we use an example of a metaphor, like, oh, you know, like this is an example I saw earlier, since I think I keep remembering it, but if you are working at some kind of desk job, right? You work all day and you just got all this damn paperwork. You can't get rid of it. You're drowning in paperwork, right? There you go. Metaphor. You can't literally drown in paper, but you can feel like you're drowning, right? It's just a way to spice up the language, you know? So there are a lot of things, and this is why I think the game was important to have a title like this, but it also ultimately kind of fell short on delivering the meta part of it. And I don't mean like, oh, whoa, I'm playing a video game that's making me think about stuff, but like that's really what it is, right? And a lot of stuff is neatly woven into the story, and I felt that was pretty expertly done, but there are not a lot of things that I feel like are really left open to you to decipher. So there are a lot of things that are very symbolic. There are a lot of things that could be considered allegorical. Like this represents this. I mean, hell, the power is called archetypes, right? So obviously they are symbolic of the ideal of whatever the type is. But, you know, ideal, ReFantazio, or like allegory, ReFantazio doesn't sound as punchy actually when I've been thinking about it as metaphor, ReFantazio. So while I think it's kind of the right word, I don't think it's the right word either. But it is the right word in it rolls off the tongue kind of sense. So take that how you will. Ultimately, the game is a total of its constituent parts. So the parts that are all really surface level, that are presented directly to you, the stories presented to you this way, the events that take place, the abilities you have, these are all really cool. And I did find, because of the name of the game, I was constantly thinking about like, how did they come to these conclusions. Like the first archetype you get is the Seeker, which is the one your main character. It's like their, I guess, canonical. I don't like using this term, but their canonical power, right? And each ally you have has their special thing that is a representation of who they are as an individual and the ideals they strive for. So that's all really cool. But there wasn't enough maybe mystery left. I mean, don't get me wrong. There is a part of this that is not answered in the story. There's a part of some things that are left to you, but enough about it is provided that it's not a mystery anymore. And I don't feel like you're going to spend a lot of time thinking about, like, what does it really mean? What does this symbolize? What is the metaphor, for lack of a better term, about what it is? So on its surface, I think it's an excellent game. There's a lot of stuff to read into it. Like, the world building is really cool. There's different little primers you can read in the memorandum section. They help keep you updated. There's even a section, if you forgot what you're doing in the story, you can just kind of go, hey, chapter by chapter, line by line, this is what we're doing, why we're doing it. That's pretty cool. But since the whole thing was kind of like about representationalism, and, you know, these people have the abilities, even though they technically don't. These people have the abilities, and, you know, they're representations of different things. That I felt like there should have been a little bit more mystery. There should have been a little bit more meta. Like, not just to be like, you know, Psycho Mantis reads your memory card. It's like, oh my god, he read. Not that kind of meta, because that's a more philosophical meta. Not like a more philosophy, open-ended place to just contemplate what's going on in this game. Why did this end up this way? Or like, how come these things are this way? And to not have any super clear-cut answers, I think kind of could have helped make it more than what it is. Like, for those of you who don't know, like, it brings to mind to me the term gestalt. It's a design term where the constituent parts all equal. Like, for example, like, you have one thing, two things, three things, whatever, and on their own they're just parts. And when you stick them together, they have a special kind of synergy that exceeds what you would expect just the parts to have. This is gestalt, right? This the essence of design. And for everything up until we get to the philosophical part, where I feel like this could really have you having like head-scratching moments and thinking really deeply, creating crazy lore. I mean, lore is not the right word because that's just history. But like crazy videos about what does this symbolize? You know, what is the subtext? Maybe that's the best word for it, of this game. So that is ultimately the biggest failing, because some of these things are just directly stated in the story and the game itself. But in the end, it's still a game by Atlus. If you like these games, it's going to be a fun ride. I cannot see this game doing any worse than an 8 out of 10 on most outlets. And if it really strikes a chord with you, I could see some people giving it a 9 or a 10. But for me, I feel like it's more an 8.5, a 9. Like, you know, on a really good day, it would be a 9. But that, I guess that philosophical aspect of it really did like drop it down for me a notch at the end. But I do wholeheartedly recommend you play this game. Allow it to show you its themes, its ideas, its presentation. Enjoy the ride, the cool elements of the design, the music, and allow yourself to be swept up into the fantasy. I hope that word vomit made some sense to y'all. And again, this was one of the best games I've played this year. So I would definitely recommend you give it a try. Well, I'm Ross Magas. This is Not Real Life. Thank you for listening to the end. And since you're here, can you please do those cool YouTube call to action things, like, share, and subscribe if you would. And I'll see you guys next time.